Today we're going to be looking at Chechnya, but not through the usual headlines. We're looking at it through the eyes of a writer named German Sadulaev and his book, I Am a Chechen.
Yeah, a really fascinating book published back in 2010 that challenges a lot of our preconceived notions of what's going on in Chechnya.
And it's not a straightforward history book, right? It's a fragmented narrative.
Yeah.
You've got personal experience, historical events, philosophical reflection, and it forces you to be really active as a reader.
Absolutely.
To piece together the story.
Yeah, and I think by piecing together the story, it makes you understand how fragmented memory is, especially when it comes to trauma.
Yeah, so let's unpack this a little bit.
Sure.
He starts with this incredible image of swallows returning to Chechnya every spring.
And this image of the swallow becomes so powerful because it's like this metaphor for the Chechen people. Their ability to rebuild, their ability to return, their ability to find hope even after devastating loss.
So it's nature mirroring the human experience.
Exactly, this cycle of destruction and renewal.
Right, and there's this really personal story woven into this image too about his sister Tanya.
Tanya, who died in infancy and who the family believes became a swallow.
Wow.
This speaks so much to the Chechen belief in the interconnectedness of life and death, the spirit world and the natural world.
You know what it reminds me of?
What's that?
Those ancient cultures that saw birds as messengers between worlds, like carriers of souls.
Oh, that's a great connection. And this deep connection to nature is so present in the book. It keeps coming back to the mountains.
Okay.
As the source of refuge, a symbol of Chechen identity.
It's interesting, though, because they also represent isolation, almost like being trapped by geography.
For Chechens, the mountains are both a blessing and a curse. They offer protection from invaders, but they also limit their interaction with the outside world. That outside world has historically come from the north, bringing conflict and invasion.
Yeah.
This duality really shapes their worldview, their sense of who they are.
This constant tension between wanting to be connected to the wider world, but also needing to protect their own unique culture.
Absolutely.
And speaking of identity, Sadulaev really digs deep into what it means to be Chechen through this lens of the Teep system.
These ancestral clans with their own unique traditions and bloodlines are central to understanding Chechen society.
So it's not just about being Chechen, it's about belonging to a clan within that larger identity.
Exactly. It adds this whole other layer of complexity to this idea of belonging.
Yeah.
Plus, you have to remember, Sadulaev himself is of mixed heritage, adding another dimension to his exploration of identity.
That makes his perspective so unique. He's both an insider and an outsider. You can't talk about Chechnya without talking about the wars.
Right.
Sadulaev does not hold back when he's describing the brutality and the impact on civilians.
And it's important to remember the historical context here. The First Chechen War started in 1994 after the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Right.
When Chechnya declared independence.
Okay.
And so you can imagine the level of resistance that Sadulaev is talking about.
Like this David and Goliath situation. This small republic up against this massive power.
Yeah, and he tells this really powerful story. His father surviving a bomb blast because their dog Pushton shielded him.
That's heartbreaking.
It is, but it also speaks to this resilience, right?
Yeah.
This ability to find hope even in these darkest of moments.
And that resilience is tested constantly, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Sadulaev talks about fighting in the war himself, and you can feel his internal conflict, this struggle between loyalty to his people and his own moral compass.
And that's what war does, right? It forces people into these impossible situations where there are no easy answers.
It makes you think, what does loyalty even mean in a situation like this?
Exactly.
Where do you draw the line?
And that internal struggle is what makes the story so powerful.
Yeah.
So relatable even for those of us who have never experienced war firsthand.
Because it makes you realize that war isn't just battles and politics. It's about individual lives being torn apart.
Yes.
And moral dilemmas that have no easy answer. In the midst of all this chaos, Sadulaev is also searching for something more, something beyond the violence.
Right.
He explores faith, both traditional Islam and the more mystical Sufi tradition.
And this exploration of faith isn't about finding easy answers or blindly following dogma.
Right.
It's about grappling with the big questions, searching for meaning in a world that often feels meaningless.
This idea of ascending that he keeps coming back to.
Right.
It's not just about going to heaven when you die.
No.
It feels like something deeper. More about reaching a higher state of being even in this life.
He uses ascending as this metaphor for striving for something more, for transcending the limitations of the physical world.
Okay.
And it's a concept that resonates deeply with the Sufi tradition, this idea of seeking a direct connection to the divine.
Right.
Through personal experience, through a sort of spiritual awakening.
So it's not just about escaping the war, it's about finding a way to rise above the chaos, to find meaning and purpose, even in the midst of suffering.
Exactly, and it makes you think about how we all search for something more, something to hold on to when the world feels like it's falling apart.
Yeah, and it's interesting how he chooses to tell the story. He doesn't give us a neat linear narrative.
Right.
Instead, the book is fragmented, jumping back and forth in time, almost like a shattered mirror reflecting the fractured memories of war.
That fragmented structure is so powerful because it mirrors the experience of trauma itself.
Okay.
It forces us to confront how war distorts our sense of time and place.
Yeah.
How it makes it difficult to piece together a coherent narrative of our own lives.
It's like when you're trying to remember a traumatic event, and the pieces don't always fit together neatly. Sadulaev captures that feeling so brilliantly.
He does, and by doing so, he challenges us to think about how we make sense of our own experiences, especially those that are difficult to process or understand.
It's a reminder that even in the face of trauma, the human mind strives for meaning, for connection, for a way to make sense of the chaos.
Absolutely.
And that's something we can all relate to, even if our own experiences are far removed from the horrors of war.
Exactly. I think one of the most fascinating things about Sadulaev's exploration of faith is how it ties into this idea of Chechen identity and resistance. Well, you have to remember that Chechens have this long history of fighting for their independence, resisting outside forces. Resistance is reflected not just in their political actions, but also in their spiritual beliefs.
So it's not just about fighting physically, it's about fighting for their spiritual autonomy as well.
Exactly, and that's where Sufism becomes so significant.
Okay.
Remember, it's a mystical branch of Islam that emphasizes personal experience and a direct connection to the divine.
Right.
It's less about following rigid doctrines and more about seeking enlightenment through your own individual journey.
Which makes sense considering their fierce independence and resistance to any kind of imposed authority, even in religion.
It's like they're saying we'll find our own path to God, thank you very much. And that ties into Sadulaev's recurring image of ascending.
You know, it's funny because when you think about it, ascending isn't just about going up to heaven when you die. It's about reaching a higher state of being in this life, about transcending the limitations of the physical world.
Absolutely, and that resonates deeply with the Chechen spirit, this constant striving for something more, for something beyond the violence and suffering they've endured.
It's almost like they're saying we refuse to be defined by this conflict. We will find our own way to rise above it, to find meaning and purpose, even in the midst of all this chaos.
And that brings us to one of the most intriguing characters in the book, Sunny Dangi, who was considered a holy fool, who believed he could talk to God.
They often have this unique perspective, this way of seeing the world that challenges conventional wisdom.
Right.
What role does Dangi play in the story?
Well, his death during the war becomes almost symbolic of this search for heaven being brutally interrupted, cut short by the violence of the conflict.
That's tragic.
It is.
But it also highlights this constant tension between the desire for peace, transcendence, and the harsh reality of a world where violence seems inescapable.
Exactly. It's like Sadulaev is asking, how can we possibly find heaven on earth when we're constantly being dragged back down into hell?
And it makes you wonder what happens to our faith, our beliefs, when we're confronted with such unimaginable suffering.
Right. And that question leads us to another key aspect of the book.
Okay.
The way Sadulaev structures the narrative itself. He doesn't give us a neat linear story. Instead, the book is fragmented, jumping back and forth in time, mirroring the shattered memories of trauma.
That fragmentation is so effective, so disorienting at times, but it really gets under your skin.
It's a brilliant literary device by mirroring the experience of trauma through the structure of the novel. It forces us to confront the way war disrupts our sense of time, our sense of place, our ability to make sense of the world around us.
It's like being thrown into the middle of a whirlwind and trying to piece together what's happening.
Exactly.
With fragments you've already encountered, which are yet to come.
Right, and you start to realize that this fragmented way of remembering,
it's not just a literary technique, it's the reality of trauma.
It makes you realize that trauma itself distorts time, and Sadulaev captures that feeling so brilliantly.
He does.
As you read the book, you find yourself piecing together the story.
Yeah.
Just like the narrator is trying to piece together his own memories.
And it forces us to confront the lasting impact of trauma. It's not just about what happened in the past, it's about how those experiences continue to shape the present, how they influence how people think, how they feel, how they relate to the world around them.
And that makes it clear that healing from trauma is not a linear process. It's messy, it's non-linear, and it involves confronting those painful memories over and over again.
It's challenging, it's confronting, but it's also incredibly powerful and ultimately very human.
I'm curious about your take on Sadulaev's craft as a writer.
Sure.
What stands out to you about how he constructs this narrative? I think it's the way he blends fact and fiction, personal experience, and these larger historical events. It's like he's weaving together these different threads to create a tapestry that is both deeply personal and profoundly universal.
It's like he's saying, this is my story, but it's also the story of my people of my homeland, of a time marked by conflict and resilience.
Exactly, and he does it with such evocative language, such vivid imagery. He paints a picture of Chechnya that is both beautiful and brutal, tender and tragic. You can almost feel the mountains, smell the air, hear the sounds of war echoing through the valleys.
It's like he's transporting you there.
Yes.
Immersing you in the sights, sounds, smells, and emotions of this place.
Absolutely, and in doing so, he captures the essence of Chechnya, the spirit of the Chechen people, in a way that few writers have been able to do.
And he never lets you forget that these are real people, real lives being impacted by the events he's describing.
Right, he brings the human cost of conflict into sharp focus.
He challenges us to look beyond the simplistic narratives that often surround conflict zones.
Yes.
He forces us to see the nuances, the complexities, the individual stories within those larger historical events.
And it's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there are moments of beauty, of humor, of love.
Okay.
It's this juxtaposition of darkness and light, of despair and hope.
It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, even in the face of unimaginable suffering. And it leaves us with this lingering question. What responsibility do we have to bear witness to these stories, to understand experiences that are different from our own, to challenge our own biases and assumptions?
It applies to any conflict zone, any place where people are suffering, anytime we encounter narratives that challenge our comfortable worldview. It's a call to empathy, to active engagement, to recognizing the humanity of those who may seem distant or different.
And a reminder that literature can be such a powerful tool for fostering understanding.
Absolutely.
For building bridges across divides.
It can help us see the world through different eyes, grapple with complex issues, and find common ground even in the midst of conflict.
What are some key takeaways that you hope listeners will carry with them?
I hope they come away with a deeper appreciation for the complexities of Chechnya, moving beyond the simplified headlines and stereotypes that we often see in the media.
It's about understanding that behind every conflict, there are human beings with their own stories, their own dreams, their own struggles.
Exactly. And I hope listeners will be inspired to engage more deeply with stories from conflict zones, to seek out diverse perspectives, and to challenge their own assumptions.
It's about recognizing our shared humanity, even in the midst of difference and conflict.
Ultimately, I hope this deep dive encourages listeners to embrace the power of literature, broaden our understanding of the world, and connect us to something larger than ourselves.
And that's something worth holding on to, especially in a world that can often feel divided and disconnected.
Right. It's impossible to understand the book and really Chechnya itself without that historical lens.
Yeah.
And one thing that jumps out is this constant theme of invasion and resistance.
Yeah.
Sadulaev describes Chechnya as this land caught between empires, facing incursions from the north for centuries.
And you can feel that weight of history. The Chechens have always had to fight for their survival, for their right to exist.
Exactly, and that historical backdrop is crucial to understanding Chechen identity and this ongoing conflict. They have this long history of resistance, of defending their homeland against invaders, whether it was the Mongols, the Russians, or others.
It's like this ingrained defiance woven into the very fabric of their culture.
Absolutely, and it makes those stories of resistance during the recent wars even more powerful.
But he doesn't shy away from the darker chapters either, right?
No, not at all. Like the deportation of Chechens under Stalin in 1944.
That's a horrific event.
Yeah.
And one that many people outside of the region might not even know about.
Right, and it left this deep scar on the Chechen psyche, this collective trauma that echoes through generations.
Wow.
Sadulaev's own family experienced this deportation, and it serves as this stark reminder of the brutal consequences of political power wielded without regard for human rights.
It makes you realize that the wounds of the past don't just disappear.
No.
They shape the present in profound ways.
They really do. And speaking of shaping the present, Sadulaev has this really insightful point about the Chechen teep system, those ancestral clans we talked about earlier.
Right.
He argues that this system, which is so central to their culture, has both helped and hindered them throughout history.
It's interesting how something so ingrained in their identity can be seen as both a strength and a weakness.
The teep system created this strong sense of community, this network of support during times of hardship.
Right.
But on the other hand, it also led to internal divisions and rivalries, making it difficult to present a united front, especially when facing threats from outside.
So it's like this double-edged sword.
Yes.
It gives them strength through their bonds, but it can also create vulnerabilities.
And this tension between unity and division is something that runs throughout Chechen history.
Yeah, and then there's the role of religion, particularly Islam. Sadulaev really pushes back against this simplistic view that Chechens are inherently fundamentalist or extremist, a view that's often perpetuated in Western media.
Exactly. He emphasizes the diversity of religious beliefs and practices within Chechnya.
Okay.
For example, he highlights the importance of Sufism, that mystical branch of Islam that focuses on personal spiritual experience and connection to the divine.
Yeah, that seems to fit more with what we've been discussing, this idea of Chechens forging their own path, both spiritually and politically.
Right, and this nuance is so often missing in Western portrayals of Chechnya and Islam in general.
So he's asking us to look beyond the stereotypes to see the complexity, the different shades of belief and practice that exist within any culture.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that generalizations about entire groups of people are not only inaccurate, but also dangerous.
So as we come to the end of our deep dive into I Am a Chechen, what do you think Sadulaev ultimately wants us to take away from this book?
I think at its heart, it's a plea for understanding. He wants us to see Chechnya beyond the headlines, beyond those simplified narratives of good versus evil. He wants us to recognize the humanity of the Chechen people.
To experience Chechnya through his eyes, and in doing so, to understand it on a deeper level.
Exactly. He wants us to engage with their stories, to listen to their voices, to see their humanity, even amidst difference and conflict.
And by doing so, I think he hopes to foster a deeper sense of empathy and connection.
I think so too.
Because ultimately, despite our differences, our different experiences,
Yes.
we all share this common human experience.
Yes.
We all long for peace, for belonging, for meaning in our lives.
And that's what makes I Am a Chechen such a powerful and important book. It challenges our assumptions, expands our perspectives, and leaves us with this profound sense of the complexities of the human experience.
It's not an easy read, but it's a necessary one.
It is.
It's a story that stays with you, that forces you to think differently, to feel more deeply. It's a story that reminds us of the power of storytelling, to connect us, to illuminate our shared humanity, and to inspire us to work toward a more just and peaceful world.
And that's a powerful message to carry with us as we navigate this complex world.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the heart of Chechnya. We encourage you to seek out I Am a Chechen for a richer and more nuanced perspective on this often misunderstood region. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep exploring the world around you.